Hi, I'm Andrew Torres, and this is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason. So if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
Skepticize everything.
Welcome to episode 83 of the Naked Mormonism Podcast, the Serial Mormon History Podcast. Today is Thursday, December 28th, 2017. My name is Bryce Blankenagel, and thank you for joining me. On this episode, we invite on one of Warren Jeffs' sons, named Roy Jeffs, to tell us about his walk through growing up as a millennial in the FLDS under Rulon and Warren Jeffs. Roy's story is very compelling, and he has a lot to tell the world. Check out his other interviews and appearances in media in the links included in the show notes. The interview you're going to listen to today was conducted a few months ago, as I was really beginning my deeper dives into studying polygamy. Roy Jeffs had given a presentation at Sunstone Symposium in July of 2017, and I was incredibly fascinated and wanted to offer him the platform of this podcast in order to tell his story. Roy offers us an interesting window into the day-to-day life inside Warren Jeffs' FLDS commune in Short Creek, Utah, and Arizona. I wasn't as aware of much of the modern-day polygamy when I conducted the interview as I am now, and you'll hear that crop up from time to time during the interview. Needless to say, Roy tells us so much information that really needs to be out there. The interview is 2 hours long in total, so I decided to break it up into two parts to make it a little bit more digestible for the listening pleasure. Tune into next week's episode for part 2 of Roy's interview, where we dive into his transition out of the FLDS religion. Without further ado, here is Roy Jeffs. As many of you listeners know, one of my favorite places to go is Sunstone Symposium. There's a myriad of amazing and compelling talks that are given and presentations, and luckily today we are joined by somebody who gave a presentation at this last Salt Lake City Sunstone Symposium in July. This is Roy Jeffs on the line, and for any listeners who may recognize that last name might know where this conversation is going, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Roy, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and I have to say, out of all of the talks at Sunstone, I find that yours was particularly unique, and you had some interesting insight to share with the people who were attending that presentation, and you packed the biggest room that was there. So obviously, you definitely told quite the story. And I'm wondering if you don't mind just kind of sharing that story here for the listeners of this that didn't happen to attend your presentation at Sunstone. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
Awesome. Well, let's just kind of dive right in. Last name Jeffs. Where does that come from?
That comes from my dad, Warren Jeffs, the leader of the FLDS. I guess it's technically now it's a cult, but the leader of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is what that stands for. And I was born into his family in 1992. And he just, at that time, he was really close to my grandpa, who was leader at the time I was born. And then he just gradually kind of weaseled his way into the church leadership and eventually took over.
Okay. Can you do you know much about the kind of the struggle for leadership and the ownership when it passed from Leroy Johnson to Rulon Jeffs, and then in, I believe it was 2002, that's when Warren Jeffs took it over. Is that correct?
Yes. My grandpa was put in, well, I guess Uncle Roy designated him as the next prophet because he had kicked out Guy Musser and Marion Hammond and Alma Timpson, who were the three people that had seniority to my grandpa. Roy Johnson had kicked those ones out, and so that made my grandpa be the next in line for seniority. And at that point, there was no more apostles left, because before that point, they were trying to ordain enough apostles to have a quorum of 12, but they never got around to that, apparently. And just fun fact, my full name is Leroy Jeffs. I just go by Roy because I don't really like Leroy, but I was named after Leroy Johnson. So
interesting.
Who my dad and him were pretty close from what my dad told us.
Okay.
So that's all.
I wanted to, you said something in your presentation that kind of struck me as odd, and I was hoping that you could qualify it a little bit more. Yeah. You said at one point in the beginning of your talk that the 2002 Olympics were a bit of a turning point. Can you walk us through a little bit of what you were talking about at that time?
So why they were a turning point never made sense to me, but that was kind of the point where my grandpa decided that everybody needed to move from Salt Lake down to Short Creek, and a lot of the, I don't know, ideas and teachings and trainings became much more strict at that point. Now, it wasn't, exactly 2002. We found out they were coming to Salt Lake for the Olympics, as you do, a few years ahead, and so they had a few years to get out of town. Okay. And we moved down, I think, in 1998, I believe, is when we moved down from Salt Lake to Short Creek. And, it was just after that my dad really started taking over a lot of, speaking for my grandpa about everything. If my dad had said it, it was as if my grandpa had said it. But, it was very convenient for him because it was, I think, 1997 that my grandpa had a stroke, and he could barely talk after that. He would rarely talk for more than 3 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
So my dad sort of became the mouthpiece. Excuse me. My dad sort of became the mouthpiece, I guess, for my grandpa. But it was, I don't know. My dad would go in the room with my grandpa for hours and, say they were talking about what he should tell the people. And then, he would come out and whatever he said was what my grandpa said. So,
wow.
It was a very convenient situation for my dad to start preaching what he wanted, to the people. And my grandpa was just way too old and out of it to even really, I would say that it's highly possible he had, some sort of, I don't know, memory loss, or he just, his eyes would always barely even open, and he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk very long after his stroke. And so there was just so many things that make everything very suspicious as to actually if my grandpa had actually said that's what my dad should be teaching.
Yeah, no kidding.
My dad had come up with it on his own, which it's highly possible that he could have.
Yeah, because at that point you're giving the, I guess Warren was giving the revelatory basis of like a weekend at Bernie's almost with Rulon at the time, right? Because if he's basically incapable of delivering doctrines and revelations, then it would be kind of up to him to say whatever your grandpa meant, and it kind of dictating the will of the prophet through Warren. It sounds like that was kind of the time where he was getting his legs as the to-be prophet of the organization.
Oh yeah. And I mean, I think he became the first counselor in 1998, which would have been, 4 years before he became the prophet. So he basically had that little stretch of 4 years to, get into the minds of the people enough to where when my grandpa died, he was able to assume authority and take it from there. But when my grandpa was in charge, it was anything but a cult. I mean, we had strong beliefs and stuff, but we weren't, nearly so isolated from the rest of the world. And you would be able to, go and, people could come to our meeting house. They could, come in and listen to church if they wanted, if they were going through town and, things like that. But once my dad took over, even before my grandpa passed away, he implemented, really strict security. He started saying, no more converts. There's no way we could ever convert anybody else.
Whoa.
And just gradually starting to close everything down as far as contact with the outside world. And just in effect turning it into, a cult and a cult following.
Interesting. And it sounds like circling the wagons almost in this case, in obviously a much more metaphorical sense, trying to keep the people on the inside and the people who are outsiders on the outside, which, that doesn't seem very sustainable. But I guess when you're operating out of this Short Creek area where they don't have a whole lot of influence from the outside or connection to the outside. Of course, St. George would be the next largest city nearby, and it's not exactly a bastion of liberal thinking and sharing ideas in a melting pot of culture. So
not exactly. Wow. No, St. George isn't. But that was, growing up, that that, and I guess that's kind of to the point of gradually clamping us off from the rest of the world is when my grandpa was alive, I used to go down to St. George with my mom to shop, every once in a while. And, after my dad took over, it was like, I rarely left the Jeffs property.
Wow.
It was that much of a difference. Like he even stopped us from going out in Short Creek to stores in Short Creek and mingling with people in Short Creek.
No kidding.
And that was just his family. And that was, later, imposed on the rest of the community, but that's usually how it worked. But, yeah.
So, Roy, let me share just a brief memory that I have. And this is my first contact with the concept of a different version of Mormonism than the Brighamite Mormonism that I grew up in. I was with some family down in Moab, near Moab. We were at a gas station there, and I saw these these two vans pull up that were fueling up at the gas station there, and there had to be 15 to 20 kids that piled out of these vans, and they were all dressed up in what looked like 19th century regalia, dresses and bonnets and long sleeve button up white shirts. And it wasn't Sunday. It was just a weird thing to me. And I was maybe 8 years old at the time, 9, I'm not sure. But I remember this being such an odd scene to me and asking my parents, what's with this? Why are these kids all dressed up? What's going on here? And they, of course, my parents were well aware of what was going on, but they just kind of said, well, they kind of believe in a different church than we believe in, but they still believe in the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. And, they kind of punted on it. And I didn't seem to make the connection that the different version meant that all of those kids likely came from, they were likely from one man and from, 3, 4, 5 wives, who knows? Of course, I don't know who they were or whatever. And this would have been back in, early 2000 probably. So that was my first exposure to this. So I want to take that as a bit of a jumping off point. Roy, do you mind kind of painting us a picture of what it was like to live in this and grow up in this society? What was your life day to day? Are they, kind of Mennonite where they only ride around in like horses and buggies and don't use electricity? I mean, obviously there might be some FLDS sects or, some polygamous sects that are that fundamentalist, but I mean, tell us what that it is, kind of a day-to-day type of life scenario that you were growing up in.
Yeah. So basically I'm going to have to give you kind of two different versions, I guess, just because growing up, up until I was 10, then we were about as normal as, a family out here, as far as like we had our regular routines. We had our chores around the house. We played games. Every day we'd get up, we did get up pretty early. Excuse me. Every day we'd get up at 5 o'clock. We'd go to what my dad called Good Words.
Good Words. Okay.
So he called it, he called it Good Words. He had a way of like naming things like family class and different things like that, with his own, names, I guess. 'Cause like on Sunday evenings, we usually gather for like an hour and we would sing songs, hymns. And so my dad called it Sing Song.
Wow.
So,
okay then.
So yeah, we would get up at 5 in the morning. 6 o'clock was Good Words, and then during the school year, we would usually be out of the door by 7 because we had morning class, and that's another thing my dad named. It was called morning class, which was just basically a devotional at school. And during the summer, then it was, usually it was just we would go straight to work after Good Words.
I want to ask really quickly as well. When you say school, this is not, you weren't bussed in and out of St. George to go to school every day for these. This was not public school, correct?
Yeah, this was at least by the time I came around. See, and this was another thing that my dad had changed because, but when that was part of moving down from Salt Lake, before we moved down from Salt Lake, then there was, I think, 2 public schools in town. Okay. And they were, people got a decent education. There were some people that went to college. And we were, quite interactive with the outside world, you would say. But then when my dad moved down, with my grandpa and all of that, then they issued like I don't know, a commandment or whatever to take their kids out of public school. Everybody has to take their kids out of public school. And so they took them out and put them into private schools where they could pray and, basically so that they could be teaching religious doctrine in school. And we are at that point, that was around 2000, I guess, just the time that we moved down. And so I was just barely going into, I think, first grade in 1999. Okay. And by that point, my dad had started a private school, which he called Jeffs Academy. He had started that in his house. And keep in mind, my dad had grown up being a school teacher. In
I didn't know that.
Alta Academy up here in Salt Lake. So he was very involved with the school, schooling, school agenda, school curriculum, and all of that. He started this one in his house called Jeffs Academy, which I think it did like 1st through 8th grade, and eventually incorporated some high school classes. But so it was a lot of religious stuff, but only in like history classes. Our history was called priesthood history. We didn't do like American history. And I guess like our handwriting or penmanship classes, that was usually integrated with priesthood history. But the rest of our stuff at that time, before my dad completely took over, was books we actually bought out here.
Really?
So we got math books and algebra books, and all of that stuff was purchased out here. So we had, mind you, I was like a kid still. So, this only went on until like 4th or 5th grade, but or actually may have gone a little more as far as math and those subjects go. But we did have, like our English books, everything was books that were purchased from, the outside world, and we would use those for our education in there up to a certain point.
Interesting. So I want to ask as well. I know that a lot of people estimate that Warren Jeffs has upwards of 60 wives or so sealed to him, possibly more, possibly less. I know it's really hard to get an estimate on that, especially even now after he's serving a life conviction and whatnot. And
78, I believe.
Say that again. Sorry.
78 to be exact.
78. I mean, wow. So I guess that only goes to make this question a little deeper. Do you know how many children are actually Warren's children?
Well, I mean, unless there were like some stuff that I didn't know about or something, my count of his biological kids is 50.
50 biological kids. Okay.
50 on the money. He had what we call the aftermarket family.
Aftermarket family. Okay.
Yeah. We'd joke around. We call like people like me that were biological, we were stock. The other ones were aftermarket, like a truck. Stock and aftermarket parts.
Oh my. That is a really horrific appropriation of those terms. Dude.
It is, but it makes it kind of, I don't know. That was our us teenagers joking around, so it could have been kind of insensitive.
Well, and joking around about your own living situation and unfortunately not knowing about just how twisted that really is from the outside, from somebody like me who's looking in on this and just baffled at something like that.
That's my step siblings or whatever. Yeah.
Wow. So I want to ask, can you share what memories do you have of actually spending time with Warren? Did you even get to see him ever?
So again, he wasn't really, he was only in my life really until I was about 10, 11 years old, but I can remember a few one-on-one experiences with him, like a couple of times up here in Salt Lake. I remember him one time taking me to get donuts and shoelaces for my boots that he had bought me. And then other times he would take me over to the Alta Academy High School, where the high school girls were learning how to cut hair. And I would get my hair cut as part of their curriculum.
Okay.
But other than that, it was usually just any other time I had one-on-one with him was when he was like correcting me for something I had said or done or something. And so it was more, I didn't really have like a personal relationship with him. And I can remember from being a kid, just being terrified of being one-on-one with him scared me.
Well, because, he was not just acting in the capacity of father at that time. It was also prophet and, somebody who had your eternal salvation in their hands, basically, right?
Oh, yeah. And like I was 6 years old when we moved down from Salt Lake. And so I can remember by the time I was 8 years old, that was the mentality I had, as my dad is now the first counselor of the prophet. So, he's I guess he's like closer to or more able to get revelation and be more inspired. So I need to be more careful about lying to him. And which I never did. Like I was so like that was my biggest flaw and probably the thing that in a weird way saved me, which, and made so my dad disliked me so much was I was so freaking honest.
Wow.
And that made so that that my dad was able to use my honesty against me, which, in the long run, I'll be honest, like if he hadn't used that honesty against me, I'd probably still be in there.
Wow. Okay.
Just because he didn't, he treated me terribly just because of how much I confessed to him. Like, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that. And so it was like
what? I mean, I'm curious, kind of what are these things?
Just thinking about a boob, or wondering what a girl looked like, or looking at a girl, or just different little things, like evil thoughts we were told were evil.
Yeah, typical boy stuff.
As I got older, masturbating. Masturbating was a thing that I got punished for basically from, I don't know, 13, 14 until I left.
Wow.
It was always about masturbation.
Yeah, I find similarities. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying it was, and me confessing. If I would have just said, no, I haven't done it, then my dad would be like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
That I was good, and I'd probably still be there. But I was so freaking honest with him that he would punish me for it. So.
You did say at one point in your talk that you kind of dreaded turning 8 years old because, I mean, as Mormons know, that's when you reach the age of accountability. Everything you do, you can murder 10 people at the age of 7.9. No, nothing bad happens. But as soon as you turn 8, you're baptized, then you're accountable. So can you tell us a little bit about what was going through then?
Kind of a bummer. I was always, before I turned 8, I was like really hoping the judgments would come.
Apocalypse come and save you from your masturbation.
Yeah, that was the only time I wanted the apocalypse to happen because, it was like after you're 8, then, I already think bad thoughts. I'm 8. And it's funny to me now because I'm like 8-year-old. Are you kidding me?
You're right.
Somehow I'm totally accountable, but my mind is like barely even halfway developed.
You still haven't even developed a full sense of empathy for people, and you're supposed to be accountable for all your sins. Okay, then.
Yeah. But I was really hoping they would come, and I just remember after turning 8, I was just like, well, this is it. Like, I think bad thoughts. Like, I'm not good enough. Like my nightmares were not about like monsters and stuff. It was about like, El Capitan falling down, which is the mountain down there by Shore Creek. It was things like that. Like, everybody being gone and I can't find anybody because they've all been taken and I've been left behind.
Oh, yeah. Were you shown the Left Behind movies as a kid?
Oh no, we didn't watch movies.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Never mind then. But I guess that, having a mountain.
We just had them, like, I guess kind of the same thing described to us in extreme gory detail of like, your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters are all going to be gone and you're going to be there by yourself. And just and it's even more horrifying because it's my parents that are telling me this.
Yeah, exactly. And letting a 7-year-old's imagination run wild without actually, putting pictures to that and just describing it in vivid and explicit gory detail. That is tantamount to, mental torture, mental abuse to a child. So you were given these vivid nightmares that were imprinted on your mind, and you were hoping that Book of Mormon style, the mountain would come down and like collapse on top of Short Creek, and you would be consumed, right?
Well, that's what I thought was going to happen. But then after I turned 8, then it was like, that is what's going to happen, except for I'm going to be on the bad end of it. Instead of, before I turned 8, then I would have been lifted up automatically because, free ticket to heaven.
I wanted to ask about some of the day-to-day interactions that happen between Warren and your mother, because I don't know. Tell us, if you don't mind wrapping this up as well into the answer, but a little bit about kind of your living situation. How many families were in the home that you were in, but also how did you ever see your mom and dad interacting with each other?
I never really saw at all romantic or, I don't know, loving relationship between my mom and my dad, and it wasn't violent either. It was just more like, I don't know. There was really nothing as far as, attraction, I guess you would say, between the two. And it's not surprising knowing what my dad did to her, emotionally, breaking her down and making her change to, be more to his liking. But there was never really any there was never really any romantic relationship there that I saw. My mom was the fixer-upper in the house. I grew up fixing everything. And so a lot of the interactions I saw between her and my dad were just him, giving her money to go buy this or that to fix up this or that in the house. And she did a lot of shopping, and it was mostly just I don't know, kind of a lot of, I guess you could say, transactional or something. Okay. There was just never really any like love there that I saw. It was more like she's his, property in a way, just because she's his wife, and wives are supposed to submit to their husbands and so on. But there was never any really attraction there that I saw.
Yeah, real healthy way to raise children, never experiencing affection.
And
wow.
I guess the good thing is like I was able, in that way, I was able to spend a lot of time with my mom and really develop just a really strong bond between her and I.
Okay.
Which, it's still like, I still go through all kinds of trauma every day, just, because of having that taken away. But, that is like, I attribute, whatever good I may be, like, I attributed to her in a huge way, just because, I learned a lot from her, and she was always there, even though, like, sometimes, it would be like my dad would give me a correction or something, and my mom would always still be there, to be like, I still love you, and, all of that. So she was always, I felt like, always an ally for me.
At least you had somebody in the home who you could look up to, who could mentor you and whatnot. I mean, because it sounds like Warren wasn't exactly a shining father figure. It sounds like at best he was absent, but at worst he was more chiding and chastising you for what you were experiencing just as a natural human being.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, he would basically call in to chastise me, and that was pretty much the sum total of the relationship. It was,
wow.
It wasn't, I don't know. And it was weird, because in some weird way I was able to develop this fantasy of a father figure that I loved, but it was never really there. It was never really reality. And it took me a long time, clear until after I left, to realize that was something I had just built up in my head and was never actually there.
Wow. You shared in your presentation that at some point things really began to shift, and once Warren took over, that's when the revelations started flowing freely. When he began, it seems like, shaping the community to be more of an insular cult. We've kind of gone over that a little bit, but you did talk a little bit, and you may have to qualify this a little bit. I'm trying to remember exactly how you told us about it, but in the presentation, you gave us this date, November 29th, 2003, as a very infamous date in your memory banks. Can you kind of lead us up to what happened and then tell us what happened on that day?
Yeah, so after my dad became the prophet, then within that same year, he just suddenly started disappearing, sometimes for weeks at a time. And we didn't know where he was going, what was going on. And gradually, like, more family members would disappear, like, his chosen wives with his kids would disappear, or with their kids would disappear, a few of them. And it just, it came to a point in 2003, I think June or July, my dad, said no more meetings, no more general meetings, for the people in Short Creek. And so we were even that much more separated. So much, there was the sense of community kind of vanished after that, because that's where we all came to, kind of meet each other, and we interacted with the rest of the community, was at general meeting. And so once he canceled those, then, he would disappear for sometimes a month. And it just got to be where he was never there, ever.
Wow.
And November 29th, and I'm pretty sure that's the exact day, but he came home, and we were just like, oh, things started to feel a little bit more like normal for a minute. And, he came home. We were playing in the we had a big basketball court out back. We had a lawn. We were doing all kinds of things, just as a family. And it was just so much fun. And, but by the end of the night, then when my dad said, had to sit down for family class, at the end of family class, he said, I want everyone to go to their rooms and not come out till morning. And we were all just kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird, but all right.
Okay.
And by the way, he had been doing interviews with the family, with a bunch of the mothers all day, and I'd been noticing that, like my mom disappeared for like an hour, and other ones disappeared for an hour, and come to find out that he was telling them what he was going to do, but so we wake up the next morning. We didn't come out of our rooms like my dad told us to. And we come out of our rooms the next morning, and it's just deathly quiet. And you can imagine in a house with that many kids, it's usually just a beehive. It's so loud.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I go to my mom's room, and her eyes are just bloodshot from crying. And I'm like, where are my two younger siblings that were, under the age of 8 years old? And she just didn't answer, and I kept asking, and she was just like, they're gone. That was, I guess, one of the few times I'd ever seen my mom cry. And it was just, this was kind of, I guess, the test run that my dad did. And this is what he did for this next several years was he would run something through his family like that to see how we reacted. And then he would do it to other people. And so he did this to us, and, basically just tore our whole lives apart. I had never imagined in a million years that I would just suddenly lose, some of my, all of my, blood siblings. I just, they were just gone out of thin air. And wow. we didn't know where they went. We didn't know, eventually my dad called us and told us they went to Zion, which was the compound in Colorado, and then to Texas. But he just told us they went to Zion, and we weren't worthy. And that's why we didn't get to go.
You weren't worthy. I mean, what were they saying that you weren't worthy for any specific reasons? Or, I mean, why were these certain of your siblings selected and you weren't? Or, I mean, was there any sort of method to this madness, or were you just kind of utterly lost in this chaos?
Well, we weren't. I mean, it made sense to us, but looking back now, it makes no sense. But at that time, it did. Okay. And like, he took everybody 8 years old and younger, or younger than 8 years old, sorry.
Okay.
So, and you can understand why that is, because of the 8 years old age of accountability.
Yeah, of course.
So he took and most of the kids were younger than 8 years old. Like, I was 10, or no, 11. I was 11. And I'm the 11th child in the family. And at that point, there were, I think, four of his kids were married, the four oldest.
Okay.
4 oldest of his daughters. So you take those ones away because they're married. And so there was just a few of us that were above the age of 8 years old and above. And so basically those other ones were, already worthy because they were completely innocent. And so the rest of us, we were just, it was stuff like you haven't been praying enough. You haven't been kind enough. You haven't just tons of different little things that weren't, we weren't good enough in some way. And it was just, he usually used just like a general description, like you haven't been fervent enough, or you haven't, just things like that. Mm-hmm. And so we would just like go search our souls and try to figure out where we hadn't been fervent enough, or where we had been light-minded,
and really like
evil.
That's kind of a catch-all too. When you tell somebody, I didn't select you because you are being, you're not worthy or something to that effect, it causes them to reflect inwards. You don't have to know anything about what they are doing for them to think they know what you're doing.
Oh, exactly. And that's kind of the genius of it, and the cold-heartedness of it. Yeah. It's just, all he has to do is say you weren't worthy. He'll figure out why you weren't. Or you weren't fervent enough. Or just in your general way, say you weren't worthy.
Yeah, or in your case, you'll confess to him why you're not worthy because you're an honest person.
Yeah, and eventually he would say, like, you weren't worthy, I need you to write me a confession letter.
Wow.
Which now I'm like, okay, that was like pretty stupid of me to ever write him a confession letter, but because like I thought he knew what I was thinking, and of course he did, because I was confessing it to him.
Well, yeah. And he would use that as ammunition against you later on, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it was just, he almost didn't like. It got to a point where even confession letters were just so repetitive. He almost only needed to read one to know anything about me, or to know everything about me, bad thoughts I'd had and stuff like that. He almost never needed, to read, more confession letters. He only needed to read one, and that was it. Like, he knew where to, hit me next. Just be like, you weren't prayerful here, or, yeah.
So walk us through a little bit further. You've kind of given us a bit of foundation of what kind of, what it was like in the day-to-day interactions. And, this is all, 10, 12, 15 years ago. And you're obviously not a member anymore. You're no longer practicing. Walk us through a little bit more of what happened as Warren was taking over and as public scrutiny began to arise. In 2008, there was the famous raid on the Twin Cities that essentially brought so much legal troubles against the Warren and some of the founding members and got them thrown in jail initially. What happened in that time?
Okay, so just a quick correction. That 2008 raid was in Texas, not the Twin Cities.
In Texas. I was mistaken. Thank you for that correction.
Yeah. So it was like a lot of this stuff was, he brought most of this scrutiny, or all of this scrutiny, he brought it on himself. Because he started eliminating anybody that he felt like was a threat to him or threat to his authority.
In what way a threat somehow?
He would like, and that's the crazy thing is it would start like it started with the Barlow boys, and those were John Y. Barlow's sons, who was the prophet before Leroy Johnson.
Okay.
And they had a lot of influence in the community because they'd been there, since the 1930s. And so they had a lot of, influence on the community. And he felt threatened by that. And so he came out in February of 2004. So this would have been about 2 months after he had taken us away, or taken the kids away from my, the mothers. And, he came, I think it was February 10th of 2004.
Okay.
And he stood up in the Saturday Work Project meeting in Short Creek, which was the only meeting they were allowed to have. And he kicked out 17 men. And all of the Barlow boys were included in that. And by kicking out, basically it meant you have to leave this meeting, go home, pack your stuff, leave your house, leave your family, leave everything, and go out into the world and try and make a living for yourself.
I mean, this was just a purging of the Barlow family.
Yeah, it was that, along with several other people. There were 17 men in total, and I don't remember who all of them were, but there were some of his brothers that he kicked out at that point.
Wow.
There were 17 in total, and he would have, I think, like, that meeting was a very humiliating meeting because they were all of those 17 men were there in the audience, and he had them stand up, or else before the meeting he walked down personally to them. And this is, at this point, the audience, there was probably 5,000 or 6,000 people there.
Oh, wow.
And he walked down to them personally and talked to them before the meeting, and then after, or during the meeting, he kicked them all out.
Wow.
And so it was very humiliating for them, but that was just kind of almost putting people on notice. Like, don't, or like, be faithful or else. This is this is the punishment.
Yeah, he made an example out of them.
Yeah, make an example out of them, and that's what happened. Like, and at this point, like, to this date, there's probably been, I don't know, upwards of, I would say between 90 and 95% of the men have been kicked out at some point.
Wow.
It started with just 17, and so many, like, everybody's been either, corrected in some way or another. Kicked out, lost their family.
I understand just the logistics of that. It's awfully necessary when you're one man marrying 78 women, and your various trusted leaders are marrying a similar amount, or a slightly lesser amount of women. There's going to be a shortage of women going around, which drives them to do all sorts of things like purge young men out of their society and turn them into these lost boys, as they are known. And like you said, at this public meeting, purge these people out of there and keep their wives, keep their families, basically, and do these horrifically inhuman things to these men just because they need more women to pass around. I mean, it's just, it makes sense logistically, and it is absolutely insidious and, in my opinion, just evil. It's really, really disgusting, and it ruins these men's lives who are kicked out of these communes, that, these societies, these cults, as you say, when they have nowhere else to turn, and when this is the only society that they know that they've grown up in.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a traumatic experience for everybody involved. I mean, you end up like, it does. He did do that. Like, every one of those men that he kicked out, he took their families, and he married them to other men. The wives he would marry to other men, and then their children had to become that man's children, and
property, transfer of property.
Yeah, property. So by the end, I guess there's not the end of it yet, but by now there's some of those people that have, gone through, 4 or 5 men. Just because my dad has, removed them, kicked that one out, and moved her to the next guy. And so it's just, it's a really, very traumatizing way of going about it. And I don't know. I don't know. I guess what else could you expect from a psychopath with that much authority?
Yeah, very well said. Walk us through a little bit more. You said that, Warren had told you a few times that you weren't worthy. Essentially, you weren't worthy for Zion. You weren't worthy to ascend to this separate commune that they have created, that they had created in Colorado. Tell us a little bit more about how things played out in through the early to mid 2000s.
Okay, so 2004 is when my dad really started purging people out, and he gradually took the rest of the family, as they quote unquote prepared or became worthy. That he took them to what we call Zion. We had no idea where it was. And it got down to a point where I was the last one there. last one in Short Creek. And so he called me. Every time he called me, he would tell me, "You're not the one, or you're the only one of my kids, one of my children that's not worthy to come to Zion."
Oh, and that must have been just a punch to the gut for you too, right?
Oh yeah. And it was also, and that's another thing, is like, I didn't take that as like, how dare you say that to me, Dad? It was like, I am a terrible, terrible, terrible person. That's the only reason that I'm not worthy to to go to Zion. And so it was, he did that until 04. Then he had us transferred from because at this point, for about 6 months, we lived in hiding in Short Creek. So just moved around to different houses in Short Creek.
Wow.
In 2005, then he had us move down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that's where we went into really deep hiding, where we couldn't even open blinds. We couldn't, anything for a while. And that's 2005, I think, was the year that he got put on the FBI's most wanted list. Mm-hmm. And it was just, for that whole year, it was just more of the same. It was more of the same, like, you're not worthy. Like, he would sometimes call us and say, "I drove past your house last night, but you weren't praying enough, so we could, I couldn't come in." I was like, "Damn it, how do I pray in my sleep?" Like, like I'm sleeping, I can't pray.
Oh man.
But so it was just little things like that, just driving into us, and me telling me how unworthy I was. And so in 2006, it was a few weeks before he got caught. Like, I was completely taken by surprise, and I didn't even fully believe, or I didn't even believe at all that I was worthy when he finally told me I could come to Texas, which, was, supposed to be Zion. And when he told me,
he was the prophet. I mean, in your mind, you thought that he could see your thoughts, basically, and that he somehow had a kind of a divine connection that told him that you were worthy, right? So you're like, "Oh, all right, hell yeah, I'm going to Zion," right?
Well, yeah, I thought that, but I was also terrified because I didn't think I was worthy, because he'd been driving into me for the past, 2 years, and also from the time I was born, all the destructions and all of that. But for the past 2 years especially, he'd been driving into me how I was unworthy. And so when he finally told me I was worthy, then I was so freaking scared of screwing up.
Wow.
Like, I would think a thought, and then I would like sit there and analyze about that thought and make sure that it wasn't a bad thought. And
because he could see your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
just torturing myself over every little thought, or like looking at, looking at a woman and, trying to imagine what was under that bump in their chest. I had no idea. And
these women, some of these women had to be, people that you were, you had spent time with in the commune, maybe some siblings, or had some kind of a familial level with.
There was a lot of them that were, like, some of them, like, I went to school with. Some of them were in like grades younger than me.
Right.
Like when I got to Texas, the youngest one there was 11, and she was almost like, I think she was going to turn 12 in like a couple of weeks, but that was my dad's youngest wife.
Oh, wow.
And so
man.
It was, and I think I was 14 at the time. And so it was just different, a lot of, experience. I was just like experiencing, natural, I don't know, whatever you call it, growing up, like whatever, natural attraction or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I felt guilty for that, and I would confess that to my dad, and then he'd use that against me.
Of course. And really, when you're surrounded by people who are, just members of this commune, when I say siblings, I don't mean direct siblings, but when there are, 78 wives and a number, all of those wives' children that you're surrounded by are extended siblings, all from Warren Jeffs here. It's kind of hard not to see some. I mean, I just. It's really gross. I'm just thinking about the level of the incestuous nature that Warren Jeffs requires in order for the community to operate, and it's just it's baffling in my mind.
So growing up, that never occurred to me ever.
Okay.
Stuff like that. The incest. I remember from being a second grader, learning from other second graders how it was bad to marry somebody you're related to. I had no idea why, but I just knew it was bad.
Yeah.
But it was definitely heading more and more in that direction. And then gradually my dad started talking about my sisters and stuff, saying, you can't be around your sisters. You can't look at your sisters. You need to be in a completely separate wing of the house, and never go in this side of the house. And then he started saying stuff about them, as if we were being tempted toward them. And I was just like, oh my God, what the hell? Why are you putting that in my brain?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember thinking that after I left, but before I left, I just remember feeling so guilty, even though I had never thought about that until my dad had, introduced it. And so it was just what the hell? Why did he do that? That was, but yeah, that is definitely the group was definitely heading more and more in that direction.
And really, there's when you have such a limited selection group to take from which to take wives. I mean, that's an inevitable conclusion. I'm not saying about you specifically, having incestuous attractions. I'm just saying that's the only way that Warren Jeffs was able to operate when he ran out of women who weren't related to him. Oh yeah, it eventually turned to him trading, wives and these daughters with his closest, upper echelon, and eventually
he married several second cousins, and he married his daughters to second cousins, and it was definitely getting more and more, I guess, incestuous. It was definitely getting more and more that way. But trying to reproduce at that rate and then never letting anyone from the outside world in, what else is bound to happen? Mm-hmm. That's My dad's brothers were married to their second cousins. There was a lot of that going on.
Because just logistically speaking, much in the way that you have to kick out a bunch of the marriage eligible men so that you have enough wives to pass around to the trusted leaders of the church. I mean, that's just an inevitable conclusion of societies that engage in this type of practices.
Well, and especially the worthy versus the unworthy. The people that were worthy were all people with most of the people there were people with well-known names like Jessup, Johnson, Barlow, Jeffs. So those were the predominant names. And so if those are the people that are the only worthy people, then, what else is going to happen?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Stewarts. There was a lot of actual, not as popular names, that would have prevented, incestuous, or inbreeding or whatever. But just because of him kind of weeding out those other names, then it became it was starting to head in that direction.
Okay, let's get back to more of kind of your walk through this. You were taken to Zion, and you were essentially told, in spite of what you thought about yourself, that you were worthy to go to Zion. Walk us through a little bit more of what happened there.
So it was, that was in August of 2006. So we went there, me and my mom, and up to this point, I'd been with my mom for basically the first 14 years of my life. And we went there to Texas and sat there and listened. Basically, part of the initiation into, being in Zion was you had to sit there and listen to all of the previous trainings up to that point that you had been called there. And so it was just weeks and weeks of listening to trainings. So you basically wake up in the morning, you go to class, and then you would go to your room and turn on audio training and follow along a transcript of my dad talking.
Wow.
And I just and that is one thing I credit my dad with, is putting me to sleep. I had some amazing sleep during trainings.
Warren Jeffs the Sandman. All right.
He hypnotized a lot of other people, but me just put me to sleep. maybe it hypnotized me. I don't know.
Okay, so then at some point you said in your talk that you were sent away from Zion.
Yeah. So I was only there in Texas for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I went there around the 1st of August, and my dad got caught on August 28th. He got arrested. And the first call he made back from prison, he was talking over the whole, we had a speaker system in the house.
And just to clarify, this was 2006, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was talking over that whole thing, and that's when he basically told the family, that I was no longer worthy to be there. And
hey, wait, he called you out by name in this?
Yeah, publicly.
Whoa.
So that was my first experience with public humiliation, I guess.
Yeah, right.
And that was September 2nd or something. And he said, Roy needs to go elsewhere. And that was my first experience being separated from my mom, which I cried for weeks, but and again, even that, crying, I have letters and stuff that I wrote back then. And I thought that I was in the wrong for crying about it, but I just I would read, cause for that point, for a long time, me and my mom had been in hiding, just me and her.
Wow.
And so I grew really close with her. We did everything together. We worked together. And so I'd pull out a sermon book and we'd read Uncle Roy's sermons, and I'd just start crying, because before that I used to do that with her. And being separated from my mom, it was it was indefinite. I didn't know when I was going to get to see her again. And that's what being separated from someone meant back then, being separated from anybody. And it happened, I would get emotionally attached to others of my dad's wives when we were in hiding, and then they would get taken away from me. And so it was just over and over and over. Anybody that I got attached to that was, get ripped away from me. And then, my mom finally got ripped away from me. And so that was probably one of the hardest things I ever did, besides leaving altogether. But that was my first experience being taken away from her. That was in 2006, and got sent to live in a RV camper out in the Wyoming, in the middle of nowhere, some ranch in Wyoming, in hiding, and did that all through winter, sometimes without heat.
Wow.
And yeah, it's depressing, but that's how I just laugh about it. That's how I get through it.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Roy. And of course, I want to thank him so much for coming onto the show to share so much with us. And of course, thank you to Lindsay Park for coordinating the logistics of the interview. And I just want to share a few thoughts after listening back to this interview in the editing room. I think Roy gave us a brief window into what life was like inside the FLDS. as Warren Jeffs rose to power and began running the area and the whole region as the prophet-in-chief. I couldn't help but notice the various mechanisms employed by Warren Jeffs that effectively isolated and kept Roy inside his indoctrination. Mechanisms that he probably used to isolate and galvanize many of the members of the FLDS. To begin with, Warren never represented a father figure in the home. Roy had very few memories with Warren, and most of those involved strongly worded guidance delivered from on high, chastising Roy for his sins, whether or not he actually committed said sins. As an effect of an absentee father figure, sister wives became incredibly independent and powerful women, and the children, like Roy, bond with their mothers. And just as Roy was coming into maturity, Warren held some kind of inquisition of his family and removed all of Roy's brothers and sisters under the age of 8, leaving their family utterly broken and Roy's mother in shambles. After that, Roy was torn from his mother and taken hundreds of miles away, only causing further psychological damage and trauma. Accompanying all of these traumatic events were the teachings of the prophet and complete isolation from any outside information. Add that into Roy's weekly letters that he sent to the prophet confessing every sinful thought which crossed his mind, and the self-policing nature which these insular religious communities create with every single person tattling on their neighbor. It's not hard to see how the prophet was able to assert and maintain absolute totalitarian control over the community. But when we look at this as a pyramid with Warren sitting comfortably atop, it ignores the fact that Warren Jeffs also grew up in a very similar society under absolute control with Leroy Johnson and his father Rulon Jeffs. Those same controlling mechanisms which Warren asserted over Roy Jeffs were asserted over Warren from a very young age, and we see the cycle of profound psychological damage perpetuate throughout generations. The truth of the matter is, everything that Roy talked about here, there's no simple fix to it. We can say the religious aspect of the FLDS is the problem, or the polygamy aspect, or the child abuse aspect, or the government fraud aspect are the problems, but they're all definite problems, but they're merely symptomatic of the cult mentality which puts people in a state of mind where all of these heinous acts are acceptable, or even considered normal. This mindset relies on an otherizing system of us versus them and protecting the us with an incessant persecution complex, which is only made worse when any government action is taken to mitigate the flagrant abuses committed by the FLDS elite. When the bystander effect keeps people from taking any action to reform or change things from the inside, thousands of people can find themselves locked in a religious society where questioning or raising any concerns about immoral actions can earn swift exile from that person's community and, more importantly, from their family. There are no simple solutions. We can only educate ourselves and try to build bridges with these communities. We need to spend time learning from people like Roy who've gone through these upbringings and these experiences. And if we understand them, maybe we can find more effective ways of educating people to help those people understand a different perspective of their own religion. And education is the key, and that's never simple. To give you a little view of what I've been up to this past week, I've been visiting some family near the Short Creek area, and I decided to take a trip down to Short Creek and integrate and mingle with some of the people in the community. And needless to say, it has been a profound experience. I'm not ready to tell all of my experiences and share all of my thoughts about the day and a half that I spent down in the area quite yet. I'll come up with a more thought out and scripted up treatise of the experience on next week's episode. But for those of you who are interested, the FLDS community is rich and thriving and beautiful, and the community is moving past the damage that has been created by Warren Jeffs and the elite leadership who have broken the community over the past decade. And that's possibly the most profound aspect that I was able to take away from all of my time mingling with the people in Short Creek. They are building a community there that is absent from the control of the FLDS, and the religious elite have essentially forsaken the people. There are the left behind group people there who still believe that somehow they're going to gain a revelation, that a revelation will be delivered from Warren Jeffs from his prison cell that dictates their next actions. But by and large, the majority of the community in Short Creek is done with the church, and they don't want any more of it. And the profound sense of hope and excitement for the future that I was able to garner from the people who I spoke with was inspiring and beautiful. If you're a subscriber on patreon.com/nakedmormonism, you're going to see an extra episode this week that is just, I called it a brain dump, because that's what it was. I was in the hotel, the America's Most Wanted Hotel, which was a massive home that was built in hopes that Warren would return after, escaping from prison or being released from prison or whatever the case may be, in hopes that he would begin or continue his reign from the area or over the area from that America's Most Wanted. And now it's been converted into a bed and breakfast. And that's where I recorded this brain dump. And it's just uploaded there, warts and all, not edited. It's kind of a mess. My thoughts are incredibly disjointed, but I just told about my entire experience. So if you want to hear that and you haven't signed up to pledge support on patreon.com/nakedmormonism, please consider doing so, and you'll gain access to all of that extra information. Just like Gungo Beardo and Nicholas Simpson did this last week. And those are our new patrons, so thank you so much, both of you, for pledging to support. And of course, thank you so much to all of the patrons who support and keep this research and investigative journalism alive and thriving. The depths of my gratitude to you know no bounds, so thank you, thank you. With that, I need to thank the people who continue to keep this show going on the back end. I need to thank Julie for running the Twitter and Facebook pages. Be sure to give her a follow on Twitter at @TheRealEmmaHale. Thank you so much to Jason Camo for providing the music used in the show with his permission. You can find more of his music at aloststateofmind.com. Thank you to Andrew Torres of the law offices of P. Andrew Torres, as well as the Opening Arguments podcast, for providing legal counsel for this show. Thank you once again to all of the patrons who pledged to support and gain access to all the extra episodes over at the Patreon feed. And most of all, thank you to all of the amazing listeners out there, once again, for lending me your ear. I hope the nasally sickness hasn't been too much to bear listening to. I also hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism podcast. preceding podcast is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2017, all rights reserved.